Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sprint 254 review. This was a normal 2-week sprint. Let's get started. I'll start with the overview, Gilbert on the UI, Adam on the providers, and Joe on the platform. This PR, we had 84 PRs, excuse me, this sprint, we had 84 PRs merged. And there was a big uptick. I had put in a set of PRs to consolidate our Renovate configuration to a central repository. So there was a PR in basically every single one of our repos. And so you'll see a lot of others this sprint, but we also had 10 bugs, 6 enhancements, and a little bit of the others. And over to Gilbert on the UI.
Thanks, Jason. So for the UI, we had one bug fix. I fixed the table pagination settings not working. And then we had some dependency fixes. I updated React Code Mirror 2 to the latest version, as well as Bootstrap Select. And Jason fixed UI Classic so it's able to run on Act for local testing. That's it for the UI. Next is Adam.
Thanks, Gilbert. So this sprint, Jason created a fork of the Azure SDK gem that we use to reduce dramatically the amount of on-disk space that was being taken up by this gem. The Azure team had been keeping all of the built versions in the gem constantly, so the size just grew and grew and grew. It was, many hundreds of meg, I believe. So we created a gem, forked version of that gem that only includes the API versions that we actively use. So that was merged this sprint, and so that should reduce the size, particularly of container image layers during the build. For embedded Terraform, we added the type constraints for dynamically generated dialogues so that if a Terraform template requires a string or a Boolean or an integer, we make sure that whatever value you entered into the dialog in the service catalog matches that type constraint. We also added a block version of checkout Git repository to clean up the cleanup of the Git repo as part of the block. So we use that. Also for KubeVirt, we removed an obsolete Spice console option. We're looking at adding VM console support for KubeVirt and OpenShift virtualization, and notice that there's an older style of the console that was unused and is no longer present on modern KubeVirt operator installs. So we got rid of that, as well as remove some unused test fixtures that were no longer being actively used by the provider. Next slide. For OpenStack, Nasser disabled scheduled refresh of child managers. These child managers delegate to the parent to refresh anyway, so there's no need to do a scheduled full refresh of for example, the cloud manager and the network manager. That was just doubling the work. So he got that disabled. And for workflows, we are now skipping any invalid workflows during repository sync. So if there's a syntax error or something like that, it'll be logged and we'll continue on with the rest of the sync. And that is it for providers. Over to Joe.
Thanks, Adam. For platform enhancements this sprint, Jason updated pods to inherit the Renovate configuration from the central location in the Renovate config repository. And as Adam already mentioned, Jason added our forked Azure gems on our Ruby gems instance. Next slide. For platform bugs this sprint, this will require some background, but concurrent Ruby was 1.3.5 was released. This broke Rails 7.0 versions because active support was depending on Logger without requiring it. The 1.3.5 version of concurrent Ruby no longer required Logger for Rails, and so this version was no longer compatible with 7.0, and they weren't going to release a bug fix of Rails 7.0. So for now, Jason locked concurrent Ruby to versions prior to 1.3.5. Next, Adam fixed a minor bug where path name was not supported in the Git worktree checkout. I updated jQuery RJS, an ancient Rails component, to revert a change where Rails 7 removed capturing of the blocks that are needed for RJS updates. Keenan made some minor fixes and changes to the virtual attribute tests. Keenan also updated the ManageIQ style used in Schema to pull in some CVE fixes. In loggers, Adam removed a long since deprecated current request ID method. I fixed an issue where showing the timelines for clusters would fail because we failed to properly identify the foreign key column for subclasses of EMS cluster. Next, Jason enforced a new Rails minimum version to 7087 for some CVE fixes. Jason also added Ansible runner specs using roles. And finally, I removed an unnecessary test that was failing on Rails 7.1 as it was testing internals of how Rails used to work. Next slide.
And that's all for our Sprint 254 review. The next Sprint review 255 will be on February 5th at the usual time. And as always, I'd like to thank all the presenters today, the ManageIQ community, and their contributions. Thanks, everyone.